The first time my husband told me to know my place, it wasn't behind closed doors. It was Thanksgiving. His entire family was seated around a polished oak table, while his mother carved the turkey like she was hosting a television cooking show. My 4-year-old son was coloring dinosaurs beside me, and my husband smiled before saying, "If you can't respect my mother in her own home, you know where the door is." No one objected. No one looked uncomfortable. His father kept eating. His brother chuckled under his breath. His mother took another sip of wine as if she'd just won an argument she'd been preparing for all year. I looked around that table and realized something that should have been obvious long before. I wasn't family. I was entertainment. The outsider everyone could blame whenever the conversation became uncomfortable. So I smiled. I folded my napkin, and I answered with one quiet sentence. "You're right." They all relaxed. They thought I'd finally accepted my place. What none of them knew was that I'd already decided this would be the last holiday I ever spent with them. My name is Natalie Brooks. 3 years ago, I lived outside Nashville, Tennessee, with my husband, Grant, and our little boy, Owen. If someone had looked at our family from across the street, they would have seen exactly what success is supposed to look like. A nice brick house, a clean SUV in the driveway, a child who laughed constantly, 2 professionals with respectable careers. I worked as a senior risk analyst for a healthcare company. Grant sold commercial equipment across the Southeast. He loved telling people he worked on commission because it made him sound like a risk taker. The truth was simpler. I was the one making sure our bills were paid every month. I've always trusted numbers more than people. Numbers don't flatter you. They don't manipulate you. They don't suddenly change their story because someone asks an uncomfortable question. People do, especially people protecting a secret. At first it was tiny things. A charge I didn't recognize. A transfer that disappeared. A credit card balance that should have been shrinking but somehow kept growing. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own. A delayed reimbursement. A customer dinner. An accounting mistake. Life is funny that way. A single lie usually sounds believable. It's only when you collect 50 of them that you realize you're looking at a completely different picture. Without saying a word to anyone, I started keeping copies of everything. Bank statements, loan documents, investment reports, credit card histories. Every month I added another folder to an encrypted drive on my laptop. I told myself I was just being careful. Deep down, I already knew I was preparing for something. I just wasn't ready to admit what. Grant's mother never liked me. Her name was Vivian. She believed a wife should orbit her husband the way the moon orbits the earth. Always nearby, never the center. During the first month we dated, she smiled sweetly and asked, "So, how long do you think you'll keep pretending your career matters once? Children come along?" I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Over the years, every promotion I earned became evidence that I cared more about work than motherhood. Every business trip proved I wasn't devoted enough. Every daycare payment became another example of how I'd chosen strangers over my own child. No matter what I did, someone else was always the better wife. Usually Grant's sister-in-law, Emily, who proudly reminded everyone she'd never worked outside the home. Vivian adored her. She praised Emily's cooking, Emily's decorating, Emily's parenting. Sometimes I wondered if Emily was actually perfect, or if she had simply learned the family rule years before I did. Never disagree, never ask questions, never embarrass the men. Grant rarely defended me. He didn't insult me himself. He simply disappeared every time someone else did. Silence became his favorite language. Whenever we'd drive home after another miserable family dinner, he'd reach for my hand and say the same thing. "You know Mom doesn't mean anything by it." After hearing those words for 6 years, I finally understood what they actually meant. He wasn't asking me to understand his mother. He was asking me to tolerate behavior he had no intention of stopping. That Thanksgiving started like every other one. Vivian criticized the pie I'd brought before she'd even tasted it. Richard complained about younger generations. Emily spent 20 minutes explaining why children behave better when mothers stayed home full-time. Grant laughed along with everyone else. Owen chased toy trucks across the living room carpet. I kept smiling, because sometimes surviving dinner feels like accomplishing enough. Then Vivian looked directly at me. "So, Natalie," she smiled, "I assume Owen is still spending more time with daycare teachers than with his own mother?" The room became quiet. I looked at Grant. Just once, waiting, hoping he didn't even raise his eyes from his plate. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Not because they were shocked, because they were waiting to see how I'd react. Vivian folded her napkin with deliberate care. wearing the same satisfied smile she'd worn for years whenever she managed to corner me in front of an audience. "I just think," she continued, "children deserve a mother who's actually present." Emily nodded immediately. "I stayed home with both of ours. We made sacrifices, but family comes first." I almost laughed. Sacrifices. Emily had never mentioned that her parents had paid off half their mortgage, or that Richard quietly covered Daniel's business losses every other year. Apparently, those details never counted as help. Only my paycheck counted as a problem. I reached for my water instead of answering. Grant still hadn't looked at me. His silence irritated me more than his mother's words ever could. Vivian leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, Natalie, do you even know what Owen eats for lunch every day? Or does his teacher know him better than you do?" That was enough. "No," I said calmly. "I know exactly what he eats." The table fell quiet again. "I know he refuses strawberries unless they're sliced a certain way. I know he still hides peas under mashed potatoes because he thinks nobody notices. I know he wakes up at 2:17 in the morning whenever he has a nightmare. I know the name of every stuffed dinosaur he owns." I looked directly at Vivian. "Do you?" She blinked. For the first time all evening, she didn't have an answer. Richard cleared his throat. "Let's not turn this into an argument." "No," I replied. "It stopped being an argument years ago." Grant finally looked up. "Natalie," his tone carried a warning. I ignored it. "I've listened to the same criticism every Thanksgiving. I've apologized. I've stayed quiet. I've smiled. And somehow it has never been enough." Vivian crossed her arms. "Because you've never actually respected this family." I couldn't help smiling. "No? I respected this family far longer than it respected me." Grant pushed his chair back. "That's enough." "No," I answered quietly. "It isn't. I've spent 6 years pretending these dinners were normal. They're not. They're public performances where everyone pretends humiliating me is tradition." Emily looked offended. "Nobody's humiliating you." I turned toward her. "Really? You've spent the last hour criticizing how I raise my son. Your mother-in-law criticized my career before dessert. My husband hasn't said one word." I paused. "So tell me again how this is normal." Nobody answered. Even Owen had stopped playing. He was standing beside the couch holding a toy truck, looking from one adult to another with the confused expression only children have when they realize something important is happening. Seeing his face broke something inside me. Not my heart, my patience. I walked across the room and picked him up. He wrapped his arms around my neck immediately. "I'm sleepy," he whispered. "I know, sweetheart." I kissed the top of his head. "We're going home." Grant stood. "We're not finished." I looked at him. "I think we are." Vivian scoffed. "There she goes again." "Running away?" I smiled politely. "No. I've been staying for 6 years. I'm finally leaving." Outside, the November air felt colder than I remembered. I buckled Owen into his car seat while he rubbed his eyes. "Daddy coming?" he asked. "Not tonight." He accepted that answer with the quiet trust children have when they believe adults always know what they're doing. I wished I still believed that myself. The drive home took almost 3 hours. Most of it passed in silence. Somewhere along the interstate, my phone started vibrating. Grant, ignored. Again, again, again. Then Vivian. Then Daniel. Then Richard. 31 missed calls before I reached our driveway. I never answered a single one. Because while they were trying to decide who had won Thanksgiving dinner, I was already planning what happened next. And this time, I wasn't planning to forgive anyone. When I finally unlocked the front door, the house was completely silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and Owen's sleepy breathing against my shoulder. I carried him upstairs, changed him into his pajamas without waking him, and tucked him into bed with his favorite stuffed triceratops. He mumbled something about dinosaurs. Then he was asleep again. I stood in his doorway for a long moment, watching him, wondering how many arguments he'd quietly witnessed over the years without me realizing he was paying attention. Children hear everything, even when adults pretend they don't. My phone buzzed again. Grant. 30-second call. This time I answered. "Where the hell are you?" he demanded. "Home. You embarrassed me in front of my entire family." I almost laughed. "That's your biggest concern? You accused me of doing nothing." "No," I corrected. "I pointed out that you stayed silent. There's a difference. He exhaled sharply. You owe my mother an apology. There it was again. Not, are you okay? Not, how's Owen? Not, can we fix this? An apology. Always an apology. For existing. For working. For disagreeing. For refusing to play the role everyone had assigned me years ago. I'm done apologizing, I said. You don't mean that. I do. The line went quiet. Then his voice changed. Colder. If you don't come back tomorrow and make this right... I closed my eyes. Then maybe this marriage isn't going to survive. For some reason, hearing those words didn't scare me. It felt like relief. I know. I ended the call. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. Instead, I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and unlocked the encrypted folder I'd been building for nearly 5 months. Every bank statement, every loan document, every unexplained transfer, every screenshot, every lie. The first missing transaction had been only $480, small enough to ignore. The second, almost $900. Then another. And another. Eventually, the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Grant wasn't just overspending. He was hiding money, moving it between accounts, opening investment positions he'd never mentioned, borrowing against credit lines I didn't even know existed. Every month, he promised things would improve. Every month, the numbers became worse. Numbers don't panic. They simply tell the truth. You just have to be willing to read them. About 3 months earlier, something had happened that changed everything. I'd received a notification from our bank asking me to confirm a personal loan application. Except, I had never applied for one. When I downloaded the paperwork, my signature appeared on every page. At first glance, it looked convincing. At second glance, it wasn't mine. Not even close. A forensic document examiner later confirmed what I'd already suspected. Someone had copied my signature. Poorly. That was the day I stopped hoping I was simply misunderstanding our finances. That was the day I hired an attorney. Her name was Laura Mitchell. I never told Grant. Laura advised me to stay quiet. People who believe they're getting away with something usually keep creating evidence, she'd told me during our first meeting. They rarely stop on their own. She was right. Over the following weeks, Grant handed us everything. Emails, transfers, account records, even text messages discussing risky investments with someone whose name appeared over and over again. His father. Richard. Just after midnight, I opened another folder. This one contained audio recordings. I hadn't started making recordings because I expected a divorce. I'd started because Grant had developed a habit of rewriting conversations. He'd promised something on Monday. Deny saying it on Friday. Eventually, I began recording important discussions simply, so I wouldn't question my own memory. Thanksgiving dinner had been recorded too. Every word, every insult, every second of Grant sitting silently while his mother humiliated me. I listened to the last minute only once. Then I closed the file. I didn't need to hear it again. I remembered every word. At 2:30 in the morning, I opened a travel website, not because I suddenly wanted a vacation, because I wanted distance. Real distance, somewhere Grant couldn't simply drive over with. Flowers and another apology. That fixed nothing. One city kept returning to my mind. Valencia, Spain. I'd spent a week there for a finance conference years earlier. It was safe, walkable, international, and my company had a European office nearby. Almost without thinking, I booked 2 one-way tickets. Departure. Less than 18 hours later. For the first time in years, the future didn't terrify me. It felt wide open. I didn't tell anyone where we were going. Not my friends. Not my coworkers. Not even my sister. Only Laura, my attorney. She was the only person who needed to know. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I sat across from her in a quiet conference room while Owen colored airplanes on a legal pad she'd handed him. Laura slid a thick folder across the table. I've reviewed everything. How bad is it? I asked. She looked at me for a moment before answering. Worse than you think. She opened the first page. The personal loan isn't the biggest problem. It isn't? She shook her head. No? The forged signature is. I frowned. Explain. If someone knowingly signed your name to obtain credit, that's not just marital misconduct. That's potential fraud. The word landed heavier than I expected. Fraud. Not irresponsible. Not dishonest. Fraud. Laura continued. I've also had a forensic accountant review the transactions you collected. She turned another page. There are over 90 transfers that don't match the explanations your husband gave you. 90? 93. I stared at the spreadsheet. Small amounts. $800, $600, $1,500, rarely large enough to attract attention. Together, they totaled almost $18,000. My stomach tightened. I had no idea. I don't think you were supposed to. Laura tapped another document. There's something else. She handed me copies of emails. Grant, corresponding with someone almost weekly. Not clients, not his broker. His father. Richard, one message caught my attention immediately. Move the money before she starts asking questions. Another, use the line of credit. She'll think it's renovation expenses again. Then another, Mom can't know. I stopped reading. The room suddenly felt smaller. It wasn't just Grant. Laura nodded. I don't think so. My phone buzzed. Grant, again. Then a text. Where are you? Another. Mom's upset. Another. Can we please talk before you do something stupid? I smiled sadly. He still didn't understand. Leaving wasn't the impulsive decision. Staying had been... Laura closed the folder. I've already prepared emergency filings. If you decide to move forward, we can submit everything today. I looked toward Owen. He was carefully drawing wings on a blue airplane, completely peaceful. Children shouldn't grow up learning that silence is normal. They shouldn't learn that disrespect is love, or that the strongest person in the room is always the one expected to apologize. I looked back at Laura. File everything. She nodded once. I was hoping you'd say that. By lunchtime, the divorce petition had been filed. The bank had received copies of the forensic report. The lender had formally opened an internal investigation into the forged loan. And one more envelope had been prepared. Not for Grant, for Vivian. Inside was a flash drive. One file, Thanksgiving, dinner, audio, MP3, along with a handwritten note. You spent years wondering why your son looked unhappy. Maybe it's finally time to listen instead of talking. Nathalie? Laura looked at me. Are you sure? I thought about every holiday, every insult, every apology I'd made just to keep the peace. Then I sealed the envelope. Yes. That afternoon, Owen and I boarded our flight. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I finally turned my phone off. 37 missed calls, 9 voicemails, more than 50 text messages. I read none of them. Instead, I watched my son sleeping beside the window, his little hand wrapped around mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering how to save my marriage. I was wondering what freedom might actually feel like. I had no idea that before we landed in Spain, Grant's entire financial world would already be starting to collapse. We landed in Valencia just after sunrise. The Mediterranean shimmered beneath the plane like polished glass. And for a brief moment it was hard to believe that less than 24 hours earlier I'd been sitting at a Thanksgiving table being told to apologize for telling the truth. Owen pressed his face against the window. Are we really here? We are, I smiled. Is this our new home? I don't know yet. But it's our new beginning. The apartment I'd rented was small but bright. White walls, a narrow balcony, orange trees lining the street below. Nothing about it reminded me of Ohio. That was exactly what I wanted. After Owen fell asleep that first night, I finally turned my phone back on. It exploded with notifications, missed calls, emails, voicemails, more than 100 text messages. Grant had gone from angry to desperate. Please answer. You're overreacting. Let's fix this. Noah. He caught himself in the next message. Owen deserves both parents. Then another. Mom doesn't know why you'd send her that recording. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened an email from Laura. Call me as soon as you wake up. It's important. The next morning, she answered before the first ring finished. You've got good timing, she said. Something happened? A lot happened. I sat down at the tiny kitchen table. Tell me. Laura took a breath. Your husband tried to move almost $60,000 yesterday afternoon. I frowned. From where? 3 different accounts. But he couldn't. Why? Because the bank froze everything after reviewing the forged loan documents. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He actually tried? He did. And that's not even the biggest problem. My stomach tightened. What now? The fraud investigators expanded their review. They found transactions dating back almost 3 years. I closed my eyes. So everything I suspected was only part of it. Laura continued. The transfers weren't random. They were coordinated. With who? His father. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Richard? Yes. They've been moving money between personal accounts, investment accounts, and a business account. Trying to hide losses? Exactly. Laura paused. And now investigators want to know whether any of those funds came from loans obtained using fraudulent signatures. I slowly leaned back. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Grant hadn't simply lied to me. He'd built an entire financial house of cards. That afternoon, another email arrived. Not from Grant. From Vivian. Subject: please call me. Against my better judgment. I opened it. Natalie. I listened to the recording. I didn't remember saying half those things. I don't know what to say. Richard admitted there are loans I knew nothing about. Grant admitted he's been losing money for years. They've both been lying to me. Please, just tell me one thing. Did you know? I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed 5 words. No, they lied to me too. Nothing more. Nothing less. Later that evening, Laura called again. You should probably sit down. I laughed. You're starting to scare me. The forensic accountant found another document. What kind? A second mortgage. On your house. I frowned. What? It wasn't taken out by you. It wasn't even taken out jointly. It was taken out by Grant alone. She paused. Using financial information you never authorized him to submit. I felt the blood drain from my face. How much? $10,000. I couldn't speak. For nearly a minute, Grant hadn't just risked our savings. He had risked the roof over our son's head, without ever telling me, without ever asking. And somehow, he still believed I was the one who should have apologized at Thanksgiving. The divorce hearing took less than 40 minutes. 6 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of documents, sworn statements, and a judge who had already read every financial record twice before anyone entered the courtroom. Grant looked different. Not older, smaller. The confidence that used to fill every room had disappeared. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by a plain navy jacket that looked borrowed. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like a man who understood consequences. He avoided my eyes until the hearing ended. Then as people filed out, he quietly said, "Can we talk?" I looked at my attorney. Laura gave a small nod before stepping a few feet away. Grant kept his hands in his pockets. I know I don't deserve your time. No, I answered honestly. You don't. He nodded. I've replayed Thanksgiving in my head 1,000 times. I'm sure you have. I should have stopped my mother. Yes, I should have told you the truth years ago. Yes, I thought I could fix everything before you found out. I looked at him. You weren't trying to fix it. You were trying to hide it. His shoulders dropped. I know. There wasn't much else to say. Some apologies arrive years too late. The court granted me primary physical custody of Owen. Grant received supervised visitation until the fraud investigation concluded. The forged loan was officially declared invalid. Every dollar connected to it became part of the criminal investigation instead of the divorce settlement. The judge also ordered Grant to repay every cent my parents had loaned him, along with accumulated interest. When the ruling was read aloud, Grant didn't argue. He simply closed his eyes, almost as though he'd been expecting it. 3 weeks later, another surprise arrived. Not from Grant. From Vivian. She asked if we could meet. Laura advised against it. My sister told me to ignore the message. I almost did, but curiosity won. We met in a quiet cafe overlooking the harbor. She looked 10 years older than when I'd last seen her. No jewelry, very little makeup, no confidence. She sat across from me for nearly a minute before speaking. I owe you an apology. I said nothing. I blamed you for everything. She folded her hands together. I thought you were pulling my son away from his family. She smiled sadly. The truth was, she paused. He was becoming exactly like his father. I watched her carefully. There were no tears, no performance, just exhaustion. I didn't know about the second mortgage, she whispered. I didn't know Richard had been hiding investments. I didn't know Grant was borrowing money. She laughed quietly. I spent 35 years believing I had the perfect marriage. I remembered every lecture she'd given me about loyalty. Every time she'd insisted that a good wife trusted her husband completely. Life had answered those speeches far more effectively than I ever could. I'm sorry, she repeated. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I was wrong. For the first time, I believed her. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. May I ask one thing? I nodded. Does Owen ever ask about us? I smiled softly. He asked about his dad. And you? He asks why Grandma was always angry. Vivian lowered her eyes. I spent years angry at the wrong person. She walked away slowly. Watching her disappear into the crowd, I realized something unexpected. I didn't hate her anymore. People who refuse to face the truth often become prisoners of someone else's lies. Vivian had spent decades living inside Richard's version of reality, just as I'd spent years living inside Grant's. The difference was, I'd eventually chosen to leave. A year later, my life looked almost unrecognizable, not because everything had become perfect, because it had finally become peaceful. Owen had started first grade at an international school. His English now blended naturally with Spanish, and every afternoon he came home eager to teach me a new word he'd learned. Our apartment was no longer temporary. It had become home. The neighbors knew us. The cafe owner downstairs had memorized my coffee order. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my life by how well I avoided conflict. I was measuring it by how calm it felt. The criminal case against Grant eventually ended with a plea agreement. His attorney negotiated to avoid a lengthy trial. He admitted responsibility for the forged financial documents and several fraudulent loan applications. The court ordered restitution to every affected party, mandatory financial supervision, and community service. His professional licenses were suspended indefinitely. Richard faced separate civil proceedings over the hidden investments and undisclosed debt that had devastated his own family's finances. The house where every Thanksgiving had taken place was eventually sold to satisfy creditors. The enormous dining room, the oversized chandelier, the polished display case full of antique knives, all of it disappeared into someone else's life. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as an empty house with a for sale sign in the front yard. Grant continued seeing Owen under the schedule ordered by the court. To his credit, he never missed a visit. He never spoke badly about me. Little by little, he became the father he should have been years earlier. Not the husband. That chapter was over forever. But perhaps a better father. People do change. Sometimes. The tragedy is that they often change only after they've lost everything they thought would always be waiting for them. One autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after Thanksgiving, Owen asked me something while we were walking home from school. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Were you scared when we came here?" I smiled. "Very." He squeezed my hand. "I wasn't." "No?" He shook his head. "Because I was with you. I had survived courtrooms, lawyers, financial investigations, years of manipulation. Yet nothing had ever humbled me more than hearing those 6 words from my little boy. Because in the end, children don't remember the size of the house, or the expensive holidays, or who won the arguments. They remember who made them feel safe. Sometimes friends ask whether I regret leaving, whether I wish I'd fought harder to save the marriage. The answer is always the same. No, I fought for that marriage every single day for 6 years. I was simply the only one fighting. Leaving wasn't giving up. It was finally accepting that you can't build a future with someone who's still busy hiding the truth. Every Thanksgiving now, Owen and I cook together. No formal table. No performances. No walking on eggshells. Just homemade food, music playing in the background, and friends who laugh because they're happy. Not because someone else has become the joke. Occasionally, I still think about that sentence Grant said in front of his family. Apologize. Or pack your things. For years, I believed it was an ultimatum. Now I understand it was something else entirely. It was the moment he accidentally handed me my freedom. And looking back, packing those 2 suitcases was the best decision I ever made, because sometimes the door someone else tries to force you through turns out to be the entrance to the life you were always meant to have.